Thank you very much. Firstly, es tut mir leid, mein Deutsch ist nicht sehr gut, so apologies to start off with. So today I'm going to talk about accounting. No, I'm not. I'm joking. I'm going to talk about how companies can keep up with the rate of technological change. And basically, I mean, you hear a lot about digital, but I want to go deeper in what it really means to be digital and what it takes to be digital. I mean, if we look at the Fortune 500, for example, in the last 16 years, so since the year 2000, over 50% of the Fortune 500 companies have either gone broke, bankrupt, they've been bought, or they've simply fallen off the map. Now, that rate of change is unprecedented. I mean, that's crazy. The market is shifting so quickly. So this means there's an ever-increasing pressure on managers to be able to innovate so that they can become the disruptors and not be disrupted. But that's very hard because big companies inherently are very complex. They have structures in place to be able to develop the products and services. So they're not as nimble, they're not fast, they're not agile like startups can be. And the question is, how can big companies use digital to become more flexible? Digitization for large companies is seen as an opportunity, but it is also seen as a great challenge because to get to become true digital is very, very difficult, and it's a hard journey. Now, some of us have some notion of what it is to be digital when you think of, okay, we don't get receipts anymore, I don't have to pay by check, maybe we can pull in data from different areas and we can combine it to create a new business model or process. That is some part of the truth, but to get there takes a lot of effort. And the most important thing about becoming digital is to focus on your data. The data is the most important part. Your data needs to be pure, it needs to be clean, so it can be used in any context. And that is important because when you remove the complexity around data and you can apply it to new areas, that is where innovation can be born. That is where innovation comes out of, bringing two different ideas together, a new technology into a new context. But what is innovation for big companies? In essence, innovation is very hard in big companies because the incentives are just different in large companies than they are in startups. Startups are inherently risky. Innovation is risky. And when you're a startup, you have less to lose. So you're not really worried. Also, big companies focus on operating profit, whereas startups focus on growth. So how do you bring innovation into a big company? Well, you can start, a little bit like SAP did, really building up innovation centers. Now, you can't do this at 50%. You have to do it at 100%. If you're going to innovate, you're going to have to commit. And because it's risky, you can't invest in one area. You need to diversify your portfolio. So, like a venture capitalist would do outside of a large company, they would invest, say, in 25 different startups, hoping or like knowing that one will provide great returns. And we need to do the same in a large company. But the problem is we measure managers' performance based on their return on investment. And we need to change that. We need to allow managers in large companies to take risks, to start asking crazy questions, and not focus on the limitations of processes that have been defined within this structure. But if we ask the question, what is it that makes startups more innovative than big companies? There are certain things. I mentioned absurdity, right? You need to be able to ask crazy questions. Because if the question isn't crazy in itself, then it's probably already been done before, so you're not really going to come up with anything new. You don't want to follow any standard guidelines. I mean, there are things you can do like design thinking, which I don't want to get into, but which help. But you want to break down any kind of formal structures to be able to come up with something new. But I mentioned also how important data was and how digitalization and being digital can help in that process. When you apply data from different sources and you can connect the unconnected or structure the unstructured, you can find new business models, new areas for innovation. And like applying a new technology or even an old technology to a new context to bring a new business model or an innovation of some kind, we can do that in the context of data. And at SAP, we've done that by applying a new technology, or actually, no, the technology itself has actually been around for a while, but the technology of being in memory using columnar store database architecture, but in the context of enterprise resource planning or corporate systems. And to showcase this a little bit of what I mean, I'd like to show a little video now. So, Linda.
What if the automobile was never invented?
Sound? Cool. Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, because obviously we're very proud of HANA, and it relates to what I was talking about before, because we came up with HANA by asking a crazy question. And that question was, how would we build applications differently if we had a database that would have a 0-second response time? So we removed that limitation. We knew it was physically impossible, but we just wanted to remove it just to try it out. And when we did some research on this, we found that, in fact, we could dramatically simplify our database, our systems, because everything we had done previously to that was getting around the problem of performance. Companies wanted real-time views on their static hierarchies, on their static structures, and we could provide that by building in complexity in the system. But when you have a database that can have a 0-second response time, you can rebuild any perspective, any view in real time. And what we did was we went to work and we tried to build it. And we got pretty close. Well, obviously, we didn't get to 0 seconds, but we can actually aggregate over 1 billion transactions in under a second. And what that means is we can have data at its purest level and aggregate to any perspective we want. And that provides a flexible, powerful platform to run a large enterprise on. So HANA has enabled SAP to innovate and transform itself, but we are now using HANA to help other companies, other large companies, and even small companies to become flexible, to grow, and to change. So we see HANA as the enabler. It has enabled all this because we've removed the complexity, we've removed aggregated data or aggregated tables. And because we've removed this complexity, we've also dramatically reduced our data footprint. Wow, okay. If anyone was sleeping now, I guess you're awake, okay? If the technology is getting a little boring, that'll do it. Anyway, where was I? We've removed that complexity, and because of that, we can in the context of big data, we've got a smaller data footprint. We can actually analyze big data far faster than we could ever before. And that's very, very important, especially when you're bringing data across the networks into one centralized system. And the central idea of having a central system is very important, because when you have a single source of truth for data, and everyone's looking at that same information, it breaks down boundaries. If I think about how I used to work before, I remember trying to produce a report. I would take an export out of a system, and then, say, 15 minutes later, someone else would do the same thing. And the data would be misaligned. We're not working live in the system. We're not looking at the real-time data. Now we can do that. We don't have to do anything in spreadsheets. We look at everything. We do all an analysis in the in-memory system. And it totally redefines the way we work. But also having a single source of data opens up domains to other domains that we hadn't really used before. For example, in context of finance, which is obviously my area, finance really touches everything. And there are a lot of users who would like to access financial data that they couldn't do before. Let's take marketing, for example, saying this is somewhat of a marketing event. In S/4HANA, what you can do now is actually you can very quickly look at the marketing spend for a specific product in a specific country and go to actually view that spend on any perspective to understand how effective a marketing campaign was and how effective that product was later down the line. Because you can see the trends over time. There's no loss of information when you're aggregating everything on the fly, because you can break it up. With the old structures, we had everything predefined. It was that locked in. It was static. Now, because I want to make this a little bit more tangible, because when you talk about this and just generally, you don't really understand it. But I've got a little demonstration. Unfortunately, I can't do it live here in front of me, but we're going to do it on the screen behind me. And I'm going to take you through an application that highlights this. It's a financial statements application. Don't get too bored. But you'll see, I think you'll understand the power of it when I start going through. So to showcase this application, I'm going to assume a role within a car company. So it's just a made-up company. But what we're seeing on this screen is actually aggregated data over 800 million line items. So it's actually calculating the operating profit over time for 800 million line items. Stop, Linda. Can we go back a bit? Sorry. I'll just quickly explain it. 1 second. OK, there we go. And what we see below, OK, we've got the operating... Stop. Normally, I would be controlling this from the front, so we actually had to improvise a little bit to make this work, but bear with us for a second, I think it will be good. Right? OK, pause. Good. OK, now what I've done here, we've applied the year-over-year comparison, and we can look at the trends over time quickly. So we can see, OK, the blue line is the electric car division, and we can see that it's shifting up from 2015 to 2016, where the petrol car division is reducing by about 15%. Now, this is a big company, and we believe this is happening is because there's a shift in the market, a rapid shift, like I was talking about at the beginning of the program. And we think this is because there's a shift towards leasing. Now, what would happen if we changed our business model to match this shift in the demand? Well, we can actually simulate this directly in the application because we are building everything off the fly. We can break down those hierarchies. So let's move on, and let's open up the hierarchy editor. So I'll go to the product divisions, and we can actually edit any of the hierarchies along the bottom in the filter bar. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new hierarchy. So I'll name this Business Model 2016. And then I'm going to create 2 new subdivisions that don't exist currently. So we'll create the first one, which is going to be our leasing model, so the leasing division, which doesn't exist. And then the second one is our direct sales. Now, the beautiful thing about this application is I can use the existing hierarchy to drag nodes from the old hierarchy over to the new one. So we'll drag over the direct sales from the petrol and the electric into the one new division. And same for the leasing. So we'll stop there for a second. And what this is doing at the moment, you'll notice that on the right-hand side, it's recalculating the operating profit of 800 million line items on the fly. So you're immediately seeing what a new business model would look like in real time. So that's incredibly powerful. I know here it looks a little bit simple, but you can actually create very complex structures with this, that a new structure based off your actual data. All right, let's continue, and we'll drag on the 2 additional nodes at the bottom, and you'll see that the top operating profit is the same for both hierarchies. That's because everything rolls up. Pause. And the reason for that is because everything rolls up, but when you're doing the organizational change, you can actually identify areas for optimization or even synergies. Right, let's move on. I'll save this and I'll move into the view. Now, the first thing we need to do is remove the old filters, because remember that we had our petrol and electric cars. So I'm going to remove the petrol car and apply direct sales to the orange line, and I'll remove the electric car division, and I'll apply a new filter, which will be the leasing, because it's loaded up a new hierarchy into the filter bar. Now, on the chart, you're going to see, right, pause a second. You're going to see the operating profit for these 2 new divisions that don't actually exist at the moment. We're simulating this, but based off real data. All right, let's move on. And when we go to the show quarterly accumulation, we can actually see that by the last quarter, the leasing division is actually going to be contributing the same amount in operating profit as the direct sales. And you wouldn't have been able to see this with other applications, because we're actually able to rebuild your company on the fly and see what it looks like based on real data in your system. And you can only do this if you're running on a digital core and you can aggregate everything from the purest data. And no one else can do this. So, but this is just the start. And where do we go from here? Well, with the Financial Statement Insights application, our next step is to actually build in machine learning. So when we're going through this data, humans typically follow a certain train of thought. So we normally follow a standard analytical path, whereas machines can actually analyze every single possible iteration, every possible instance, and then give us an idea of where to look. So it might look for anomalies in the data, come up with some suggestions. I'll click on a suggestion, it'll load up the filter bars with the right components, and then I can give feedback to the machine saying, yes, this was a problem, or no, actually that's normal. And then it can learn and build off that. But machine learning is actually used across the industry. You can look at it predicting the financial close for big companies. Because essentially, finance will become automated. And automation is a big part of the digitization movement. We need to learn from the big data. We need to bring in the business networks. And we are doing that at the moment with the platform that we're building. In fact, the application that you saw here was built in what we call the HANA Cloud Platform. And this platform, essentially, we're opening up to third parties. We're allowing companies to extend off it. It opens up that data source for lots of people to then contribute, creating an open environment to build into. So this was just a very quick glimpse. And I'm going to be around today. So if you've got any further questions, maybe we can already take some questions now. But thank you very much for your time. And I hope I didn't bore you with finance, because I know this is kind of a cool event. And this is the first time I've done a speech in a Friends set, but this is great. This is great. Thank you.